Merhaba hocam, how are you? Welcome.
Merhaba, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you for coming. I'll just wait maybe a couple of seconds for people to come in. We're at 6. Okay, I think it's steadily increasing.
Okay.
How is it over on the other side of the world?
It's getting better. California and the larger United States was hit really hard by the coronavirus. And right now people have a sense of hope because of the vaccinations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been fully vaccinated, which was quite a moment, so I'm really thankful.
Yeah, I mean, we've had quite an intensive vaccination scheme here, but I think they're taking it step by step. So a lot of people have had their first jab, but here it's two. I'm not sure how it is in the US, and a lot of people are waiting for the second one now.
And which city are you in?
London.
London, okay.
Yeah. So I think we could start now, and hopefully the numbers will kind of unravel as we go along. So firstly, thank you for accepting to be here with us, in the
It's an honor.
afternoon for you. So for those who are new to Professor Pandya and her work, she is a professor within the Religious Studies Department at California State University. In 2016, she was awarded with the Advancement of Women Award. She's also a Fulbright scholar and specializes in topics around the issue of women's rights in Islam itself, social movements, and Islam in the modern again. So a very interesting and kind of similar field to my own interests. So it's very exciting for me to be hosting this with you today. So for this month's book club read, we decided to go for an article, something shorter that hopefully the more of us could complete. And we read your article on Hicret, Hizmet, and female volunteers of the Gulen movement in California. It was interesting for me reading it because it was a pre-2016 article. So comparatively, you could assume that a lot of dynamics are changing. And to look at the gender dynamics within Hizmet of Hicret, so it's a couple of things with itself, and how that plays a role in perhaps family lives, changing dynamics within the context of those people's own identity, their sense of belonging in the US, and how Gülen's theology perhaps has had a role in that, or maybe there are external factors. You mentioned throughout your article that the post 9/11 context has also impacted those volunteers. So for those who haven't read the article, it's an ethnographic piece of research. You interviewed 18 women throughout, and it's quite, I think, a rich contribution to the understanding of women within the movement, and also you touch upon briefly concepts of masculinity and how males within the movement are perhaps changed through various dynamics. So that was a very kind of brief summary of the whole of your article. But if I could just go straight into the questions, and I had sent you some earlier, and I've got some that came in from those who have read your article as well. So I could perhaps dive into them. The first question is what is hijret? How do you define it in your article? And then perhaps if you could develop on after that, has the post 2016 Hizmet context had a change in that definition, where a lot more people have had to leave Turkey?
Okay, and first of all, I'd like to say that I'm all distracted by these lovely hearts, and I do see the names of many people that are very close to me. So a special merhaba to you. I see you there. So let's talk about hijret for a moment. Of course, in Arabic, it's hijra, and it has to do with the Prophet, peace be upon him's journey out of Mecca into Medina. And it's also, metaphorically or symbolically carries more meaning than just the historical moment. It also, in Islam, travel connects you to God. And it also can help you practice your religion, because as the Prophet, peace be upon him, leaves Mecca, where he's, enduring a lot of different types of oppression, you know, there's people throwing sheep's uterus at him and all of those things. So he goes into Medina and is able to build a strong religion. And then you also have the metaphoric understandings of the night journey as well, of when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was called to travel to Jerusalem and then up through the heavens to meet with the different, you know, first he meets with the different prophets and then ultimately to meet with God. So there's this trope in Islam about travel being something that takes you out of your comfort zone to have a transcendent, even if maybe sometimes painful, but transcendent experience, sometimes an experience that helps you reach God or helps you help other people or helps you bring your religion to help other people. So, you know, the article that I wrote was before the coup attempt in 2016. But since then, I've been interviewing refugees. I went to Greece on 2 different occasions and interviewed refugees and asked them about what happened to them and how they understood what happened to them and how they understood their migration. And of course, refugees were not always able, you know, when I would meet them in Greece, they were not always able to process what had happened to them to a full extent. You know, some of them were hopeful that they would have a sense of mission soon that would enable them to understand what happened to them as a new form of hijret, as a new form of, you know, like imitating the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's journey, where again, you have to take your values and take them out to the new place. So people tended to tell me things like they were very sad, it was very hard. You know, sometimes they experience torture, sometimes they experience just devastating loss, but usually they end by telling me something like, we hope now that we can connect to other people that have experienced what we have experienced. We want to be, you know, we want to be able to get to where we're going and be productive citizens there. We want to, you know, we're going to carry out Hizmet in the new place that we land, in Germany or in Italy or in the United States. And that's how we're going to heal. And in fact, that is, of course, Hoca Efendi or Fethullah Gülen's message to people. Before, the movement didn't really have a big diasporic consciousness. It didn't see itself as, you know, a group that was deeply victimized until it was deeply victimized, right? But after this, definitely the diasporic consciousness has been raised, and people in the movement are, you know, very much talking about the new service that they have to do and the new meanings that they have gained from this. There's a reframing. And so Fethullah Gülen himself has said that people are lucky if they get to have a forced migration, because the forced migration is superior. It's a test from God to teach people, you know, deeper values about reaching, you know, being able to help more people, you know, through suffering. Of course, you know, we know a lot of people have just read John Paul's book, right? Through huzn, the collective suffering, you can reach, you know, you can process your suffering through a hoşgörü, and then you will end up having empathetic community, empathetic solidarity. So there's a lot there. There's a lot. It's a fertile ground. The suffering that people just took place or just experienced creates, you know, like a fertile space for people to reconnect to their spirituality and to reframe what's happening to them, to connect to other people that have suffered, and to carry out a more meaningful hizmet. And just like, frankly, and this is where I'll end with this question, frankly, I think people used to carry out a form of service that perhaps was not as meaningful or as informed as the service that they're going to carry out now, because now I think they really understand marginalized, vulnerable, oppressed people in a way that people didn't understand before.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think perhaps I'm not going to go in the order of the questions that I sent you, but I'll just see if I can mix them up a bit. I mean, what you spoke about now and what you kind of mentioned in your article, there's a very Turkish or ethnic focus to the work that's being done within Hizmet, and perhaps is it possible to say that what's gone on within Turkey and then the forced migration, has that impacted the kind of Turkish identity of these people who would perhaps see themselves as Turkish Muslims mediating in the US, you know, through their organizations? Do you think that's changed?
Yeah, very much. I talk about the Turkification. I use that word, right? Turkification in the article that you just read. And I say, you know, if the movement's going to stay viable, it needs to de-Turkify.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it started to de-Turkify right after, right away. It had already begun the process, but it really began it seriously. And now it's been forced to continue on it in a very serious way. In fact, people are moving away from their Turkish identity. And I think that's part of the growth of the movement. I think it makes the movement richer. When I first knew the movement, it was a very insular movement. They wanted to reach out to other people, but they didn't necessarily want people to join them so much. Mm-hmm. And when people did join through marriage, it wasn't always that comfortable of a relationship. Sometimes it was, but there were always, you know, some issues, like Indian women that married Turkish guys in the movement. They would say, oh, the Turkish women are not eating our food, or, you know, it's just hard for me to fit in. Or a Bosnian woman would say, they just, you know, the sohbets are all in Turkish, I can't fit in. Some of those problems still exist, and they're just practical problems. But I think right now, people in the movement are very aware that, you know, they've suddenly become awake to this concept that the Turkification process that they were indoctrinated with in Turkey, this Atatürkification, right, where Turkey is the center of the world, and the, you know, the whole sun theory, right? They are now acutely aware that they were told a lot of myths, and some of those myths were not true. And people are no longer wanting to identify as strongly with Turkey. Of course, there's nostalgia and there's a lot of missing of the country of Turkey. But this idea of Turkish superiority has been deflated by the fact that not only did Erdogan persecute them, but a lot of people supported Erdogan. A lot of Turkish people supported Erdogan in his persecution of people in the movement. So people in the movement said, you know, I don't identify as Turkish anymore. Turkey deleted me, so now I'm going to delete Turkey. I don't think anybody can completely delete Turkey. There's so many beautiful things about the country of Turkey, right? But I think that there's a lot of anger and a lot of understanding now. Oh, wait a minute. If what is happening to us is really, it's real, then what the things that those Kurds have been complaining about, or those Armenians, or the Greeks, or the Jews, you know, that must have been real too. We must have been told some lies, and you know, that takes away from this the feeling that, you know, Turkey is like the center of the universe, has never done anything wrong, and also creates, you know, more empathy for other marginalized groups, deep empathy. And you know, people would say when a ship would sink, I would feel bad, but I never thought of the people on the ship as each one of them having a name and an identity and a cause and a set of values. You know, I never thought of that, but now I do. Now I wonder, like, what happened to them? What are the root causes of the reasons for which they're on that ship, and why did it sink? So people are much more aware, I think, of global issues, and might I say, of politics. In the movement, I think, you know, 10 years ago, politics was a terribly dirty word in the movement. And I think right now people are realizing, wait a minute, politics just means that you're trying to change things in the public realm. And in fact, we have to be involved in politics, because if we are going to fight against persecution, against oppression, I mean, that's a political act. Mm-hmm. So you see women actually gathering together in the United States under the banner of the 668 babies in, you know, in the prisons, releasing balloons, the black balloons with the 668 on them, or gathering together to fight for women to be freed from the prisons in Turkey. And I think that's very, you know, that's really appropriate. I think it's a maturation of the movement.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a similar thing has kind of been observed in Europe as well, within the UK, from women and youth. I think predominantly that those actions and movements are led by people who, you know, both, perhaps it would be fair to say, within the movement itself and in society at large, are within, you know, a persecuted section of society. So I think it's very interesting that through hardship they've come to realize, you know, like you said, that politics isn't a dirty word; it's the reality that we live in, and that their voices do matter.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's very important as well. Just kind of to touch upon the sense of identity of these women, then, do you think, you know, before those who came without a forced hijret, you know, those who came voluntarily, perhaps, we mentioned the de-Turkification difference, perhaps, that's occurred now. Is there any kind of other patterns that you may identify at all?
The women that came originally that I had met, and some of them are still my friends, you know, I know these women now for like 21 years or so, because I first came into contact with the movement in 1999, but they were very Turkified, you know, very much so.
Yeah, I remember one of the subheadings in the article is like, you like baklava, I like baklava, we can come together around baklava. And I just thought, for me, I mean, for someone who's been in the movement for not that long, you know, not since 99, it's very odd. It reminds me of an imperial kind of undertone, something that, you know, I'm bringing something to your culture and we can unite around this. Rather than perhaps finding something within the culture that can unite people. I mean, I know that's
you're putting your finger on it. I mean, there's certain things that I'm sort of, you know, too polite to say sometimes, but that's exactly it. You know, you know, I mean, I just remember somebody telling me, and I think I write about this, that Indian food, for example, is a corruption of Ottoman food, and that's why should I eat the corruption? I should go right to the pure source of the Turkish food. Right, so you know, why would I eat a corruption?
Yeah, I mean,
so there's a lots of, you know, and then you hear like a group of Hizmet people, you know, 10 years ago, they would go out to other groups without asking them, you know, do you want us to come? They would go out and you know, sort of try to bring them things instead of saying, like, what would you need to have a relationship with us? You know, so again, and if I look at you and I say, you look like you need $20, that's not always a compliment, right? That's not always a compliment. You're thinking, why do you think I need $20, right? That's you're giving me something. So I think again, the movement did gain a lot. I mean, it lost a lot and gained a lot after the coup, because it became acutely aware of what it's like to be in a, you know, in the role of victim, and you want dignity. You don't always want a handout. You want a hand up, but you want dignity first of all. And so I think that's really important. You know, the people that I knew and the movement when it was really young, of course they wanted to give other people dignity, but they just had never experienced a lack of dignity yet. They hadn't experienced that yet. So it really did mature them to, I mean, not just those people, but the movement in general, to have to understand what it's like to feel like a victim. You just don't want, I mean, I have friends that would say, I looked into a mirror and I said to myself, I guess this is what a refugee looks like. But you know, you don't really want your whole identity to be lost. And I mean, if we bring up the Kurdish community and the baklava issue, not that Kurds don't eat baklava, they do, right? But this idea that if Turkey is 20% at least, you know, or so Kurdish, then why were none of the Kurdish musical events or Kurdish food, Kurdish, you know, the highlighting of Kurdishness didn't really take place in a lot of the cultural or interfaith centers. And that, I think, is a loss. I think it's a profound loss for the movement. I mean, they tried to be multicultural, but you know, in their defense, it was hard because of that de-Turkification. One of my friends in the book, we call her Damla. I'm just making sure I'm not using her real name, Damla. I mean, she pointed out that she was told her whole life that Kurds were not good people, that they were dirty people. It was not until the movement that she learned that, no, they're humans, and, you know, they're humans just like her. But I think that to understand that to actually have them represented at every event would also be important. I think that doesn't really hit until you've experienced something like the purge.
I mean, and I just kind of to touch upon a few of those issues. I mean, when the Kurdish issue was kind of mentioned within the movement, I mean, it would always be a surprise to me that people I mean, they were aware, but not fully aware that, you know, Said Nursi was a Kurd, and they were reading and upholding his books within their own homes. But to what extent would they engage, you know, a culture that he would stem from? Is another issue. And I just think it's definitely, as you said, the kind of necessity to have that de-Turkification. And just, you know, on the topic of food, I mean, you mentioned Indian food. Like, I can recall when people, you know, would feel perhaps disgusted to kind of eat with their hands, you know, as for example the Arabs would. But you know, you're Turkish, you wouldn't do that, because why would you, you know, fall to the level of an Arab perhaps? But I think all these kind of stereotypes have hopefully been overcome, and will do, both with the engagement of youth and, you know, second or third generation people perhaps in the kind of that the movement is in now. I'm just kind of looking through the questions. You kind of touched upon globalization within the essay, and I've put a quote here, and it was very interesting for me. You know, the Gulen movement is now truly a global phenomenon. In fact, on a recent trip to Yemen, a country which McDonald's has not yet reached, I discovered a Gulen-inspired center had been founded, and it made me smile. You know, a country like you'd think McDonald's hasn't reached it yet, but a Gulen-inspired center has. I mean, I don't know if you were able to come into contact with that center there, or centers in other areas of the world, or members from other different countries. But would you say there are kind of parallels in the issues surrounding identity that you had highlighted in the US? So the de-Turkification, do you think that that's something that is widespread throughout the movement, or in the US perhaps?
Yeah, I'm just taking notes so I can hit all these things. One thing I want to talk about just briefly is that you mentioned this movement, this move and maturation against maybe latent racism, even within the movement, that people just were unconscious of. And of course, we just have to take a moment to understand that everybody has some of that, because we've been socialized into that. And it's one thing to not be a racist, but it's another thing to be an anti-racist. And I think the youth are really beginning to understand this, that you have to be anti-racist. You can't just be against racism, or, you know, like, I'm not a racist. And it's a process, and it's a journey. And it takes a long time to uncover and unpeel all the layers of that onion, right? So of course we don't just want to say, okay, we've arrived, because nobody's arrived. We're all unpeeling. So I just wanted to point that out. And then when you think about all of those centers around the world, I have been able to see movement centers in at least 18 different countries. Hong Kong, Cambodia, the Philippines, God, I can't even list them all. Singapore, Malaysia, just Ethiopia even, right? All over. And one thing that's kind of funny to me, just will maybe make you guys laugh, is that they really do kind of look all the same. And also, I can always tell the Abi whenever he picks me up, like, which guy is the Abi at the airport. I sort of don't worry about it. I just go to the airport, wherever I am, Ethiopia, wherever, and I can find the Abi. Now, you would think it's easy to find the Abi in Ethiopia, but I can even find him, like, in Turkey. Even in the Turkish airport, I can see which one is the Abi. So it's just funny. But yeah, the centers are also very similar. They have similar setup. They have similar rooms. They have similar art. And one thing I want to say is that, that's normal. It's a transnational organization. And of course, they're going to use some kind of, we use the word cookie cutter. There's going to be some, copying of structure. And that's just normal, okay? But there's so many times when I think it's not the best thing. For example, I had a graduate student go to Cambodia, and she actually was able to interview some of the Hizmet people and some of the Cambodian people that came, and some of the Cambodian people that worked there. And her argument was that the Hizmet people had not done enough work yet to figure out what the Cambodians need there. I mean, they had, in the 70s, there was a massive genocide in Cambodia where 1/4 of the Cambodians died. And yet there was still a lot of hierarchy, not died, they were massacred, right? It was a genocide. So there was still a lot of hierarchy in the movement, where people like the Cambodians were still sort of hired to be, in a servant role. which would maybe inappropriate given the recent genocide. So I think it's important to think when, that cookie cutter model, okay, it's normal, but let's also, like, go when you're going to Cambodia, interview the Cambodians first. Instead of being so left brain, right? The movement's very left brain. Try to get some right brain people, do some social science and find out what people want. What do they need in Cambodia? What kind of hizmet do they need? I think that would be really appropriate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, I agree with that. I think it's something to do with emotional intelligence, and perhaps, I don't want to say Turks in general and be a racist towards Turkish people, but I think within the Turkish culture, although they're very, very hospitable people and would open the doors to everyone, there's a side that I think is lacking, and perhaps that is linked to the de-Turkification as well, and just that kind of cookie cutter model that you just described. But also when you mentioned anti-racism, I mean, for me as well, there's something very fairly recent that I've came into kind of contact with, and that's through the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that perhaps a lot of global phenomena is going on at the same time in parallel to itself, with the context of women's rights as well, and then the situation that Hizmet finds itself in at the moment. So there's a lot of change going on in the world, and Hizmet, through when I look at it through that lens, just going through it in transition as well. So perhaps there could be further benefit to come through that as well. We just look at the other questions.
And that's definitely true. I think that, of course, the movement doesn't exist in a bubble, and it's going to react to what's going on in the world. It's going to react to the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement and everything else, right? Yeah. And not at the same, there's still going to be the older, more conservative abis, and then the younger communities that are kind of chafing and saying, give us the reins, take us seriously. So I think that's going to happen too. The youth, there's just going to be different. We know about the rift in the movement, the two groups, the ones that are really very angry about the Abbey League system and lack of transparency, and then the ones that want to just reset the whole thing as it was before, just a nice internal reset. But there's more rifts than that, because there's intergenerational differences that I've noted. And I think the movement will not really, I mean, the elders know, they know that the movement won't continue unless the youth find it to be relevant to their lives, and unless the elders give them more responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I think that's happening slowly. Of course, Turkish culture means that, that it's going to be a slow change. Mm-hmm. But it's happening. I see it happening.
Mm-hmm. I think it's slow, but it is, I think, a radical change.
Yes.
In terms, I mean, if I'm considering, observational gender segregation perhaps within the movement, which to an extent, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, in the UK, I went to an all-girls school. I don't see segregation as an issue per se, but I think within society at large, it does have a lot of kind of things, negative connotations associated with it, and within a public realm, it isn't welcomed, in the West particularly. And I remember reading, I don't know if it was from a book or an article, but schools in Turkey would have separate entrance doors to the staff rooms for males and females, for example. From a movement that has segregation to that extent, to something that's transitioning, I think, very, very well now within its new host countries, and internally within the movement itself, within the movement meetings that go on internally, whether that's through dialogue centers or mentoring schemes that the movement has in its host countries. There's an internal push for gender equality and then which I think, is kind of another one of those global shifts that the movement finds itself in, with this ongoing transition as well. I don't know if there's anything gender related that you wanted to kind of bring up, because we spoke about race quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about gender. The movement actually did empower women, mm-hmm. even early on, because and even it worked against the class system, because it empowered people in the countryside, in the rural areas, by bringing the poorer and more rural people to the center of Turkey and educating them And that was one of the more revolutionary things that it did. And it hasn't gotten a lot of credit for doing that. In fact, it kind of got in trouble for doing that because the Kemalists were very angry by the fact that there was this massive shift. But it's revolutionary because not only did people from the rural areas come, but for the very first time, girls and young women came from the rural areas. They were educated and brought to the center because of the dormitory system, the ishik evler and the yurt, right, system. And families felt safe about having their girls taken care of, that they'd be safe to go to the center, to the better universities. And so you have girls, families for the very first time, where women would become educated. And that was tremendous. And not just educated, but educated in fields that were male-centered, male-dominated, like science, math, technology. So, I remember reading something about the so-called mousy Hizmet women, and I laughed because I thought, God, you probably never talked to one. You don't underestimate the Hizmet women, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because there were lots of them are like rocket scientists. Okay, very, very smart women, very, very highly educated women. So that is one thing to be said. But then, in terms of gender equality, I think when I wrote that men became more willing to help their wives and women became more, able to get help in California, for example. I think this was also a global phenomenon to a degree, but not everywhere, because there's also the parallel story of wives that were brought to rural areas with their husbands. Their husbands would be setting up those institutions, maybe in one of the Ikistans, Uzbekistan or something like that. And the wives were just a little bit neglected and didn't have that much to do sometimes. And there was some family problems with that, where wives would just be pulled and then have to move every 3 years. But today, like when I've talked to the youth, one of the things that the youth tell me is that absolutely they recognize that the movement has been very patriarchal, despite Fethullah Gülen's, admonishments to people to be less patriarchal, and his call, like the women should even learn karate, that women should take fields at every level of society. Nevertheless, the movement is still fairly patriarchal. The youth would, definitely want to change that. They don't understand why it has to continue, and they want it to be different. But I want to tell you something. I was sweating sweating bullets. I went to interview Hoca Efendi. My last interview, I said, okay, I don't know how many times I'm going to be able to interview him, so I'm going to ask tough questions this time, and I will not tell anybody what my questions are first. And I asked him if a woman could follow him as a Hoca Efendi. Okay. And all the men in the room started laughing, and I looked, I'm like, why are you guys laughing? This is a serious question. And it is a serious question. Like, why not? And he didn't, so the good and the bad of the answer is that he said very many positive things about women. And he said that he had even advised Erdogan at one point to hire a woman vice president, and that he believed that women should take every role. So another positive thing is that he did not say no. He never said, no, a woman cannot replace me. So the sad thing is he didn't immediately say yes. He said that the people in the movement are, he said he was ready for full equality, but people in the movement were not as ready. He seemed to acknowledge that there was still patriarchy in the movement. So it was a very long, complicated answer, and I'm sure that many of the young women wished he had simply said yes. But the good news is he didn't say no.
And I think with I'm just trying to think what was it that he said, but it's missed my mind now. I forgot. I was going to say, I hope that the example comes later during our discussion. But he's multiple times said that women can hold position of leadership, etc., etc. He forms his discourse in in a religious discourse to kind of help those within the movement who perhaps do have that patriarchal mindset to kind of be liberated that through you know, a more gender balanced and equal discourse. But unfortunately, I think, did I remember? Yeah, I think he was asked. Just trying to think of the example. No, it's past me again. Hopefully,
Well,
come and go.
He told me that his favorite Sufi saint was, you know, I think you say Evliyatullah, right? In Arabic, it's Awliyaullah. So it's a Sufi saint. He was Rabi al-Adawiya. Yeah.
He does make reference to her during his own writings as well. But yeah, I mean, in multiple cases, you know, and back when he was in Turkey as well, you know, when he was interviewed by journalists and academics at the time, you know, I think his perspective on female leadership at least hasn't changed. I mean, I think in his writings we can see there is an emphasis on the woman's nature being a caring nature, you know, which perhaps may not sit well with kind of liberal feminist discourse, you know. But I think for his time and for, you know, movement that he is in himself, it is a very bold move. And like you said, you know, women from the countryside were moved to larger cities to study these very male dominated fields, and that itself was I think a very large step.
And if you think about Hoca Efendi himself, and I wrote an article about this, about the different forms of masculinity between Erdogan and Hoca Efendi. So Erdogan is kind of a macho guy, right? Kabidai, right? The uncle. I know I mispronounced that, but sort of the brutal uncle who's, you know, very macho, kind of gang member type. That's Erdogan. Hyper masculinity. But you know, so Fethullah Gulen is on the opposite spectrum of that. He finds strength in, you know, I don't know if we want to call it masculinity or femininity. He finds strength in a way of being that is more controlled, more empathetic, more accepting of emotions, more flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he cries, right? And crying is a sign of strength. It's a sign of being able to be in touch with God, really, right? Because if you can't feel, how can you feel God? So in a sense, Hoca Efendi has done something very powerful. He has made it acceptable to be more on that femininity spectrum. Okay, and I'm not saying he's feminine. He embraces a form of masculinity that is also very disciplined in terms of controlling your nafs. Okay, but in a sense, it's akin to feminine values or feminine ideals in that it's very sweet, it's empathetic, it's emotional, while still being strong and in control of your, especially of your nafs.
And I think that's something that you can, you know, trace back throughout Gülen's life. Well, you know, when he was giving sermons in Turkey as well, you know, he would sit at the pulpit and cry in front of hundreds of or even thousands of people below, and the whole, you know, mosque would cry with him, which was something kind of unseen. And like you said, you know, it's I think, you know, bravery in Gülen's understanding is through vulnerability. So you can't make change without being vulnerable. And I think he, you know, embodied that. I remembered what Gülen had said, and I made note of it so I don't forget this way around. When he was asked about, you know, gender equality and you know, what women should do in their rights, I think the question probably posed to him was, you know, asking for him to say that men should, you know, grant women greater equality. But his answer was more framed in the sense that, you know, women in every instance should ask and push for their own rights. You know, that change should come from the voice of women. So I was just thinking, perhaps is that why, you know, he didn't say yes to your question? You know, is he expecting a female figure to stand forward and maybe not say I'm the new Hoca Efendi myself, but you know, that there, for women to claim their own rights, could perhaps that be within his discourse? You know, perhaps, you know, the men around him or you know, within the movement at large wouldn't accept that, but is that something that he's defending? Is something that I, you know, question sometimes.
historically, Sufism has transcended gender.
Mm-hmm.
But, you have strong Sufi women and men, and it's just been an arena in which, because the values in Sufism are so spiritual, and the attempt in Sufism is to, control your bodily nature and your bodily desires, your nefes. I said nafs. Nafs is Arabic. It's nefes in Turkish, right? So you're moving away from bodily desire to be closer to your spirituality. So that spirituality is not gendered, and God is not gendered. So I can see the wisdom in Hoca Efendi's answer, in that, in what you're saying. First of all, that it's not for him to tell a woman whether or not she will become a Hoca Efendi, and also it's sort of maybe it's the wrong question, because we're talking about gender, and for Hoca Efendi, what is gender? Like, what does he care about gender? He doesn't seem to care very much about gender. He's about what is right. He transcends gender.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and I think that's kind of seen, very early on in his life, where he decides not to marry, but that a Turkish setting is very anti-masculine. It was a cause of insult for him. A lot of people insulted him within Turkish society and Turkish press, because, how could it be that the man, you're not going to get married? It was, I think how sexuality that then plays into that dimension itself is very interesting, and a valuable contribution, I think, to the discussion.
Yeah, I was told that a lot of the Abiler were criticized because they would even carry something called, I call it an Abi purse. You guys know what I'm talking about, the little square purse thing that fits the Quran and the prayer beads. Yeah. And they don't drink, don't smoke, don't womanize, all of those things. But the thing is, it's just like it's like if you're studying a martial art, one of the first things that you learn, whether you're male or female studying this martial art, is that it's not about the fighting, it's about the discipline. It's about the discipline, right? And the same thing, the martial arts is very much not about being hyper masculine. That's so devalued in martial arts. And so, to say that it's weakness to actually be spiritual is, a complete misunderstanding of spirituality. It takes so much discipline. It takes so much strength, So it's hard to even use these terms, masculine and feminine. Do I say Erdogan is hyper masculine? I don't know. The words masculine and feminine no longer seem to encompass what we mean. He's just really aggressive and out of control, right, Erdogan? And the people in the movement, as exemplified by Hoca Efendi, would be trying to be much more spiritual and in control, which really requires discipline and tremendous strength. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if we think about being godlike, so when when you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, those two words, Rahman and Rahim, come from the Arabic word womb. Mm-hmm. So, God is a womb here. God is has feminine, so-called feminine attributes as well. Mm-hmm. And maybe primarily.
That kind of distinction of associating the Hizmet movement with those Sufi values, which it does try to uphold. And then I'm just thinking, is it then fair to say the Islamist counter Turkish Erdogan regime, is it to do with the kind of more theological or ideological understandings of faith that influence those elements of gender? Is it because Erdogan is Islamist that and it's further than Islamist? It's you could throw the words authoritarian leader in there, populist in there, dictator in there, but is it perhaps it's his character being reflected through his modes of leadership, but that also was kind of an interesting element to me, to compare perhaps a more Sufi peace-building social movement with a regime that upholds more, negative undertones of governance.
It's very interesting, because if you look at a lot of the world's traditions, there are strands within each tradition that tend to be much more flexible, fluid, about compassion, more friendly towards women. And then you have these rigid rigid traditions that are more authoritarian and more about being in control. They tend to like violent punishments. Okay, so you have that, even within Christianity, you have evangelical Christianity, which, they preach that you have God, and then you have man, and then you have women below man. She's supposed to be his helper, not his equal. She's his helper. And then children below, and it's completely acceptable to not spare the rod if you're trying to not spoil the child. So you can beat your children, right? And then you have other forms of Christianity, like the Quakers or the Unitarians, that are very, they don't believe that there should be this hierarchy or hegemony. They don't believe in corporal punishment. They don't believe that women should not be equal to men. So it's true in Islam as well. And I've long been interested in this dichotomy that to me seems very gendered. I mean, come on, ISIS it's so gendered. They are such uber hyper masculine, toxic masculinity. They even take sex slaves. Come on, like it's hard to understand why women would want to join them, except maybe very confused teenage girls that just think, oh, this looks so cool, oh, they're such macho men. I don't know why women would join them. Because it is such toxic masculinity. You've got hierarchy, you've got control, you have this embrace of violence, and this other attracted to things like Hizmet movement. But what I really like about the Hizmet movement, frankly, is that it's not just that it's people join because they're attracted to this other mode of being. Sometimes the movement, not sometimes, but the movement also teaches this other mode of being and teaches why it's valuable. And this is one of the things, or the thing that I find most valuable about the Hizmet movement, period. Because in this world which devalues, we just survived Trump in the United States. It devalues diplomacy, interfaith dialogue, talking before you are violent, being peaceful. It devalues peaceful, and it says it's weak. It devalues these things as being weak, as being like you're giving up on your values, you're giving in, you're being submissive. Instead, the movement says, and as do these other communities like the movement and these other world traditions, right? They say that no, being peaceful requires discipline. It's a hard road, but we get a better outcome. It's long-term thinking. It's there's all kinds of strengths there. It's actually a better solution. It's complicated. Yes, it's messy, but long term we're going to save lives, and this is important.
I think even getting to the point why you value that is a struggle. So it's definitely a valid contribution. I'm just looking at the time at the moment. We've got 7 minutes. I've thoroughly enjoyed it so far. I was wondering if anyone here has any questions. I'll look through the chat to see if there were any. I don't think there were, but if anyone has any questions, I don't think there were any. I'll just wait for people. I mean, whilst I'll give some time for people to kind of type any questions if they do. Just a very typical way to end. But do you have any suggestions for them?
Sometimes people ask me at the end. They ask me, and maybe people are thinking like, inshallah, we hope that Hoja Effendi will live, forever, at least till 120. But what happens after the death? What happens after the passing? And I think we have to think of it. You have to realize yourselves that the youth are really important here. I mean, what happens depends on your involvement. Whether the movement splits or if it's going to somehow remain coherent as one group, it's able to internally reform and accommodate everybody. This will really depend on the youth. And I think and especially the women, the activity of the women. Women are often sort of socially constructed to be able to help bring people on board with their peacemakers and might be able to play a role here to help keep the movement together, or at least help keep it, or at least help with the transition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just, I mean, I think it's, you know, statistically proven that women are, you know, again, socialized to have a higher emotional intelligence, you know, be able to pick up on those social cues perhaps, and you know, sensitivities within communities. No further questions have come. Just, you know, a lot of people thanking you for your contribution, and wishing that everyone in Hizmet had the opportunity to know you.
I feel like I've met so many people. Yeah, and I'm saying hi to all the people that I have met, because I've seen several names of people that I know. So, you know, special hi and special lots of love. I have to hold my phone in one hand, but here's the heart, you know, half a heart. So lots of love to you. And I want to remind you that when women have this emotional intelligence, culturally constructed or not, sometimes women tend to not value it as much as it should be valued. And I think this is where we should really maybe leave some of these women, is that you have to value yourself. As a creation of God, you have to value yourself and your own voice in terms of what's going to happen next with the movement, what's the best way to help the refugees, what's the best way to carry out Hizmet. You don't want to allow the men to speak for you or over you. You want to be able to make sure, you have to push a little bit, make sure that your voice is heard, and that you fight against your, you know, that little demon inside of you that says that you're not valuable, or that you're not, or that you should let others speak first, or that maybe somebody else knows what they're talking about and you don't, and you'll just listen. You should take your seat at the table and make sure to say what you need to say. You're very valuable. Your voice is very valuable. Look at the state of the world. There's been so many mistakes made, and it could have been you that could have helped with that. So please do take prominent roles. Please let yourself use your own voice.
I mean, that's definitely a shift that I've seen, that hopefully will continue throughout the movement. No further questions have come, so I think we could, you know, end it there. Thank you very much for joining us. It was, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Felt like a sohbet book club, where we had a lot of intellectual discussions as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks again for inviting me. Thanks for reading the book. I feel very honored. And please take care of yourselves. Be safe. And special thanks to you for organizing this event.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.